Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you're not a war hero or a great king. You're just a nameless, sunburned nobody in the late Bronze Age, which mostly means you're starving, barefoot, and living through the slow-motion implosion of everything humanity once thought was permanent. Your crops have failed. Your gods have stopped answering, and someone just set fire to the only road out of town, which is fine, because there's nowhere left to go anyway. Before the last bit of your village crumbles into ash and your neighbours start bartering teeth for barley, do me a small favour. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is. I always love knowing who's tuning in from around the world. If you'd like early access to more historical bedtime stories, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, you'll find the Patreon link in the description. But for now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. You were born into a world already dying. You don't know that, of course. All you know is that your mother looks thinner every week. Your father stares a little longer at the empty sky, and the local well tastes more like mud than water. You're not alone in this. The goats have stopped breeding. The fields have turned to dust. Even the wind seems too tired to blow anymore. But no one tells you you're living through the collapse of civilization, because no one around you knows what civilization really is. All you know is that things are bad, and no one remembers when they weren't. You've never seen the inside of a palace, but you've heard of them. Rumours pass from one half-mad traveller to the next. Towering columns, rooms of painted stone, storerooms filled with grain and dates and beer. You think maybe they were real once. Maybe your great-grandparents paid taxes to one. Maybe someone in your bloodline once worked for someone who worked for someone who polished a scribe's sandals. But that was another age. Those cities are smoking pits now, their names already forgotten by your neighbours. Their stone idols lie broken in courtyards covered in weeds, their archives burned before anyone could bother reading them. Now, even your local chieftain sleeps in a wooden shack that leaks when it rains. Trade used to be the thread that tied it all together. Tin from the east, copper from the mountains, lapis from distant lands, no one here can pronounce. Great ships once crossed the seas, carrying grain, wine, and polished goods to every corner of a connected world. But the ships have stopped coming. The roads have crumbled into gravel. The donkeys have starved, the merchants have fled, and the scribes who recorded it all are now dead or digging latrines. You don't trade anymore. You beg, or steal, or die. You might have been born in Canaan or Anatolia, or near some nameless patch of dry earth between fading kingdoms. The borders are changing faster than anyone can redraw them, and your town has been ruled by 4 different warlords this year alone. None of them last. None of them help. They show up, they demand grain you don't have, and then they vanish, usually into a ditch, usually with arrows in their backs. One of them claimed he was the reincarnation of a sun god. He bled like anyone else when he slipped on a wet rock and cracked his skull open in front of the village oven. The world you were born into is shrinking, not because you're travelling less, but because there's less left to travel to. You know the next village, and maybe the one after that, but the places your ancestors spoke of, Hattusa, Mycenae, Ugarit, they're just sounds now. Ghost words, names passed down like spells with no meaning. The stories your grandfather told of golden days and royal gifts from Egypt now feel more like bad jokes, the kind you only repeat when the fire's gone out and the night is too quiet. The worst part is, you think this is normal. You think it's just the way things are. Why wouldn't you? No one alive remembers anything different. No one old enough to recall the last harvest that didn't end in disappointment. You assume that gods are distant and fickle, that starvation is just part of life, that people die from drinking river water because they're weak, not because the river itself is a disease. You think life is meant to be this short, this painful, this exhausting. You don't know you're living in the death throes of a 1,000-year experiment, that what's crumbling around you once supported the greatest concentration of urban life the world had ever seen. You don't know that entire alphabets are being lost, that bureaucracies, languages, technologies, even myths are vanishing faster than anyone can carve them into clay. And even if someone told you, you wouldn't care. You're too busy trying to keep your last goat alive through another dust storm, too busy scraping moss off rocks for soup. This is not a single war, or a plague, or a bad season. This is everything failing at once. Governments, crops, weather, memory, hope. It will take centuries to recover, and by then the world that comes after won't remember you. Not your name, not your pain, not your gods or your grave. You are not the hero of this story. You are not destined for greatness. You are one of the millions who will slip through the cracks of history, unrecorded, unloved, and very likely unburied. And it's only just beginning. Once civilization meant something. Not to you, of course. You were born too late for that. But the elders still talk about it, usually when the fire's low and someone's managed to ferment something worth drinking. They speak of cities with names you can't spell, walls so high they touch the sky, and kings who could end wars with a letter stamped in clay. The world, they say, used to run on rules. People knew where grain would come from, where armies would march, where trade would flow. They talk about it like it was a god you forgot to worship, one that noticed and left. They say that long ago ships came from the west with jars of wine and copper tools. Caravans from the east brought lapis, tin, incense. If you lived near a port, you could trade barley for oil, and oil for bronze and bronze for safety. Even if you didn't understand how it worked, you benefited from the friction. Greedy palace scribes tracking weights and payments, bored diplomats trading daughters for treaties, dusty merchants counting profits in units you've never heard of. Civilization was a mess, but it was a working mess. And now it's gone. The palace economy was the beating heart of it all. You didn't need coins, just clay tablets, complicated seals, and trust in a system you'll never understand. The kings hoarded the food, the priests hoarded the writing, and the rest of you did what you were told. It wasn't fair, but it kept things from falling apart, until it didn't. Now the palace where your father once delivered tribute is a charred ruin, the records inside reduced to brittle ash, and no one remembers who was supposed to be in charge of anything. Writing? Gone. Once entire rooms were filled with scribes, men who knew how to press reeds into clay and make the world behave. You saw one once when you were small. He wore clean robes, had fingers that looked like they'd never touched a shovel. He carried a stylus like it was a weapon. He wrote your village's name on something and your uncle didn't get whipped that season. You thought it was magic. You weren't wrong. Now, there are no scribes. The last one starved in the corner of a shrine, clutching a broken seal. No one knew what it meant. He might as well have been holding a dream. You've heard stories about diplomacy, how kings once sent letters across the sea, calling each other brother, trading gold and horses like gossip. You've seen one of those letters yourself. Though you couldn't read it, someone used it to patch a roof. The ink ran when it rained. That's what international relations means now. Kindling, roofing, toilet paper. The idea that someone once negotiated the fate of cities with a friendly gift of lapdogs and perfume feels like a cruel joke. Even the gods had their hierarchy once. Great temples in great cities, each with priests trained in ritual lore and the fine art of staying fed while everyone else starved. They interpreted omens, read the stars, anointed kings. They didn't just worship the gods, they spoke for them. Or at least that's what they claimed. Now, the temples have been stripped bare, their idols dragged into fields, their gold pried loose by trembling hands. Some priests fled, some starved, and the rest decided it was easier to become warlords. Their prophecies sound a lot like tax demands. You didn't notice when it started breaking. No one did. At first it was little things, a shipment that never arrived, a well that ran dry, a new tax levied by a new leader with a new name. Then came the refugees, broken families trailing behind oxen, their stories half whispered and unbelievable. Cities burned, Palaces abandoned, armies vanished in places they were supposed to win. People stopped laughing when they told those stories, then they stopped telling them altogether. Now, this is your normal. You wake up in a hut that leans slightly more each week. You check the clay jars, still empty. You help your neighbour bury a child. You hear the sound of hoofbeats and hide, not knowing whether it's a tax collector, a raiding party, or someone worse. You used to have a word for government. No one uses it anymore. Whatever it meant, it's not coming back. You live surrounded by ruins you can't name, built by people who knew things you'll never know. Your plough breaks, and you pray to gods who don't answer, hoping someone in the next village remembers how bronze is made. They don't. You trade dried fish for a rusted blade, and consider yourself lucky. You once found a painted shard in the dirt, part of a vessel, with shapes you can't decipher. You keep it by your sleeping mat. Not because it's useful, because it feels like proof that someone once knew what they were doing. Civilization, they say, was a golden age. But to you, it's just a word, a rumour, something that used to exist somewhere far away before the world turned brittle and cruel. You didn't fall from greatness. You were born into the rubble. Hunger isn't new to you. You were born into it. It's your first memory, and it never left. But lately, it's changed. It's not just hunger, it's absence, the kind of emptiness that reshapes your bones, that swells your belly and hollows your cheeks, that makes your teeth feel loose in your jaw and your thoughts too slow to finish. You wake up hungry. You go to sleep hungrier. You dream of bread you've never tasted and wake up chewing your blanket. It started with the droughts. One bad season became 2, then 5. The river dropped to a trickle. The fields cracked open like wounds, and the barley sprouted pale and weak before dying under the sun. You tried to pray, but the sky didn't care. You tried to dig a new well and hit dry stone. You watched your father slaughter the last goat, apologising to it like an old friend. That was 3 winters ago. You still remember the taste, mostly because you haven't had anything that rich since. Then came the tribute collectors. The palace was already in ruins, but they still came, demanding grain in the name of a king whose name no one bothered to carve anymore. You gave them half of what you had, and they took the rest anyway, said it was for the army. You haven't seen an army in months unless you count the group of half-starved men with spears who camp near the river and beat people for fish bones. They say they're soldiers. They look like thieves, but so does everyone else now. You eat what you can find. Most days that means bitter roots, stripped bark, or a stew made of grass, ash and desperation. Your neighbour claims to have caught a lizard. You don't ask how, you just nod and hope he invites you to dinner. He doesn't. Once you caught a bird and wept as you roasted it. It tasted like smoke and sadness. You chewed it slowly, afraid the joy might kill you. Rotten grain is still grain technically. You scrape the mould off and boil it 3 times. It still smells like a damp grave, but you eat it anyway. Once, someone brought a sack of lentils from a ruined town downriver. You traded your shoes for a bowl. They were the best lentils you ever had. Full of gravel and grit and tiny bugs, but warm and filling. You miss those shoes more than you should. Your feet haven't stopped bleeding since. You know hunger is making people strange. A woman down the road boiled her sandals and served them to her children, like soup. A man tried to roast mud patties over a fire and told everyone it was a sacred ritual. You caught a boy gnawing on a tree branch, his gums bleeding with every bite. No one laughed. You just nodded, understanding. You tried it yourself later. It wasn't bad once your tongue went numb. You've stopped counting meals. There's no point. Time is measured in stomach pangs and dizzy spells. You only remember it's morning when your hands shake too hard to carry a bucket. You only know it's night when you start hallucinating figs on the walls. You've considered eating the family dog. But the dog looks at you with the same thought in its eyes, so you've reached an unspoken agreement. Wait 1 more week. Sometimes food arrives. A few wild tubers, a sack of shriveled onions, a dead bird found under a bush. You share what you can, though no one shares much anymore. Sharing is for people who expect the world to last. You eat in secret now, hunched in corners, hoping no one hears you chewing. You've buried scraps to keep them safe. You've stolen from children. You've pretended not to see others doing the same. There are rumours, of course. Cities with stores of grain, regions where it still rains, traders who travel with bags of dried dates and honeyed bread. You've never seen them. No one you know has. But the stories are enough to keep you walking, to make you believe that just one more mile, one more barter, one more miracle might deliver you from this gnawing slow death. You know better, but you listen anyway. Once your aunt tried to teach you a harvest song, something about full baskets and generous gods. You don't remember the tune. You only remember the way her voice cracked when she sang it. She died the following spring, curled up beneath a fig tree that hadn't borne fruit in years. You buried her with a handful of spoiled barley, just in case the afterlife is less cruel. Hunger isn't a punishment anymore. It's not a consequence. It's just the air you breathe, the condition of being alive in this age. You've forgotten what it's like to eat until you're full, or what it means to have a favourite dish. The idea of spice, of sweetness, of variety, it all feels like fiction now. You eat to keep breathing, and even that feels like a losing gamble. There are no feasts. There are no celebrations. The gods don't send rain, and your neighbours don't sing. You survive, if that word still means anything. And tonight, like every night, you will go to sleep with an empty stomach, a buzzing skull, and the faint taste of boiled leather on your tongue. There was a time when the idea of foreign invaders was something whispered around fires, an old fear like snake bite or famine, distant but never quite gone. Then they arrived. Not just one group, not one enemy with flags and kings and official declarations, but waves of nameless violence, each more brutal than the last. You don't know what to call them. Sea peoples, land pirates, starving migrants, with nothing left to lose. It doesn't matter. The result is the same. Your village burns, your neighbours die, and whatever security you once imagined evaporates like morning mist. They come without warning, sometimes by sea, sometimes on foot. Sometimes they ride donkeys. Sometimes they come screaming, sometimes silent as ash. They don't wear uniforms, just scraps of armour and stolen jewellery, and their weapons are all different. Curved blades, blunt clubs, fire-hardened spears. One of them carried a bronze sword carved with symbols none of you could read. He used it to cut a man's throat for a pot of boiled turnips, then dropped it when it got stuck in a tree stump. You buried the blade, not out of reverence because it scared you. No one really knows who they are. Some say they're ex-soldiers from broken kingdoms. The others swear they're cannibals from across the sea, or cursed tribes driven mad by drought. A travelling merchant once claimed they were the ghosts of drowned sailors come back to punish the living. That was before someone cut his tongue out and left him tied to a fig tree. You never found out who did it. You never asked. Curiosity is a good way to lose your last few teeth. What you do know is that they don't negotiate. They don't leave warnings or give ultimatums. They don't care if your village is small or defenceless, or already half-starved. They take what they want, kill who they want, and burn the rest. You've seen it. You've lived through it. You've hidden in cellars, under carts, behind piles of dung. You've held your breath while boots stomped past, while someone screamed 3 huts away, while the air filled with the smell of blood and roasting grain. Last spring they hit the town downriver. You didn't hear about it from a messenger. You smelled it. Smoke on the breeze, thick and greasy. The survivors, what few there were, came limping into your village days later. Their feet shredded, their eyes blank. They didn't say much. One woman kept clutching a baby that wasn't there. One old man just repeated the word, fire, until he stopped breathing. You offered them water. They didn't drink it. You've tried to defend yourself, of course. Every village has. You sharpened sticks, set traps, post lookouts. You bury valuables under trees and smear mud on your faces to look like corpses. Sometimes it works, usually it doesn't. They come anyway, and they're always hungrier, angrier, more desperate than the last time. Your defences don't scare them. Your pleas don't move them. If anything, your fear excites them. The worst part is, they don't always leave. Sometimes they decide to stay. They take over the village, squat in the ruins, demand food and women and shelter. If you're lucky, they die of dysentery within the month. If you're not, they become your new leaders. Just as cruel. But now they expect respect. You bow to the same man who killed your cousin and called it a misunderstanding. You call him chief. You teach your children to smile when he passes. No one builds anything anymore. What's the point? It'll just be burned. You've stopped repairing roofs. You sleep on the floor, behind walls blackened with old fire. You keep your grain in 3 separate caches, one hidden in the well, one under the goat pen, one sewn into your sleeping mat. You no longer trust your neighbours. You no longer know who your neighbours are. People move constantly now, chasing rumours of safety that never hold. You've seen what they do to the bodies. Sometimes they pile them high and burn them. Sometimes they leave them for the dogs. Sometimes they arrange them in shapes. Spiteful art, bone and blood and finality. You try not to look. You fail. You see it every time you close your eyes. You remember the way your brother's face looked when you found it in the ashes. Half melted and grinning. You used to think raiders were a punishment, that you'd done something wrong, or your village had angered the gods. Now you understand. This is what happens when everything breaks, and nothing replaces it. This is what fills the vacuum left by kings and palaces and trade networks. There is no order now. Just hunger with a blade and a bad temper. And it's always moving. Always looking for the next fire to light. You tell yourself you're lucky to be alive, that the last raid missed your house, that the next one might not come for weeks. You repeat these lies while you dig a hole to hide your daughter in. Just in case. You're not preparing to fight anymore. You're just trying to survive long enough to watch someone else get raided instead. You were raised to believe the gods were always watching, that they shaped the weather, decided the harvest, guarded the walls, and listened, especially when you were desperate. You were told that if you made the right offering at the right time with the right words, things would get better. Rain would fall, plagues would lift, the missing would return. That's how it worked for your grandparents, supposedly. But you've burned everything you have on every altar you can find, and the sky still cracks open with drought and dust. The temples are gone now, looted, toppled, swallowed by time or fire. The ones that still stand are hollow shells, stripped bare of statues and priests. You passed one last month, a great stone husk overtaken by weeds. The god it was built for has no name anymore, at least none that anyone living remembers. Someone had smeared ash on the walls in the shape of a face, or maybe a sun, maybe both. It was hard to tell. A stray dog was sleeping inside. That felt appropriate. Once your ancestors lined up outside holy places to offer grain, to ask for guidance, to give thanks. Now you break into shrines looking for anything edible or flammable. Clay figurines, sacred oil, incense. None of it holds meaning anymore. You've seen sacred idols used as doorstops. You've watched a dying man curse every god he could name before he choked on his own blood. You've heard priests beg for mercy from the same forces they claim to control. None of them were spared. Your village used to hold festivals. Songs, dances, symbolic marriages between gods and goddesses, baked cakes shaped like stars. You remember being lifted onto someone's shoulders as people lit torches and sang into the night. That stopped years ago. Now the only song you hear is the low, hoarse chant of the old woman who sleeps next to the ruined granary. She burns something strange every night. Animal bones, dried herbs, bits of cloth, and whispers to no one. You tried asking her what she was doing once. She didn't answer, just looked through you. like she was waiting for a different face. Sacrifice has become a grim routine. At first it was simple: a chicken, a rabbit, a handful of grain, then a lamb, a goat, a few teeth from someone who didn't make it through the fever. You thought it would stop there. It didn't. A man from the hills came through last month with blood on his hands and a smile full of broken teeth. He said the rain came back after they burned a thief alive. Your village listened. The next morning, someone was missing. The day after that, smoke rose from the old stone circle on the ridge. The rain still didn't come. The oracle used to speak in tongues. People travelled for days to hear her mumble cryptic truths through a veil of smoke and crushed herbs. Now she just rocks back and forth in her hut, muttering nonsense, chewing her fingers raw. Someone asked her for a blessing last week. She started laughing and didn't stop for an hour. When she finally did, she told them to dig their own graves before winter. No one knows if it was a prophecy or a joke. You've tried everything. You've fasted, sung, wept, painted symbols on your walls in crushed berries and old blood. You buried a talisman in the dirt and dug it up the next day to see if it had changed. It hadn't. You tried praying to new gods, foreign ones whose names came through traders before they stopped arriving. One was shaped like a bull, one like a crescent, one like nothing you'd ever seen before. Just a circle with jagged arms. None of them answered either. There's a man in the next village who claims he is a god. He eats alone, carries a staff made of driftwood, and never blinks. People leave him offerings, dried fruit, scraps of meat, even a severed finger once. He never speaks, just watches. You don't know if he's divine or just broken. Either way, he hasn't made the fields bloom or brought anyone back from the dead. But it's something to believe in, even if it's a lie. The worst part isn't that the gods are silent. It's that you've started to suspect they were never listening at all. That all the prayers, the songs, the careful rituals were just things people did to feel like they had control. Now that the world has fallen apart, there's no illusion left, no great reckoning, no divine punishment. Just rot, dust, and a long, slow silence. Sometimes you wonder if the gods died long ago, slipped away quietly when the first palace burned, or the last tablet cracked in half. Maybe they saw what was coming and chose not to watch, or maybe they were never real. Just names carved into stone by people even more afraid than you are. Either way, the sky remains empty, the earth remains dry, the altar remains cold. You still pray sometimes. Not because you believe it'll help, but because it's all you can do when the night is too quiet and your stomach won't stop growling. You whisper to whatever is out there, gods, ghosts, ancestors, wind, because silence feels heavier than hope. You ask for rain, for food, for sleep without dreams. You never get a reply, but you keep whispering anyway. Because what else is there? You used to hear stories about how things worked, not the real details. Those were kept in scribes' heads and locked behind palace doors, but the outlines. Trade moved goods, roads carried carts, messengers delivered orders, craftsmen built tools that didn't break after 3 uses. Everything had a place, a function, a name. That world is gone. What's left is something broken, half-remembered and increasingly absurd. Your village used to get copper from the hills. Not directly, of course. You didn't mine it yourself. It came from merchants who got it from someone else, who got it from someone who actually knew how to extract it without dying in the process. Then someone figured out how to melt it with tin, and somehow that turned into bronze. Tools, weapons, statues, locks, magic basically. But the merchants stopped coming. The smelters died or fled or were killed for carrying too much value in their hands. And the hills, if they're still producing anything, are crawling with bandits and broken carts. You had a blacksmith once, or rather, a man who said he was a blacksmith. You're not sure if he really knew what he was doing, or if he just inherited the title from someone else who did. He used to patch tools, repair hinges, reshape old blades into uglier, barely usable ones. You brought him your father's sickle once. He banged on it for an hour, muttered something about wrong kind of metal, and handed you back what looked like a bent fishhook. That was the last time you asked. The word wheel used to mean something. You've seen them carved into old stones, chariots with gleaming spokes, stories of swift travel and glorious warfare. Now if someone says wheel, it takes people a moment to remember what that was. Your neighbour tried to build one for a cart last year. It fell apart the moment he put weight on it. Round, it turns out, is harder than it looks. These days, if you want to move something heavy, you just drag it until you or the thing breaks. Even the buildings are falling apart faster than anyone can keep up. Roofs cave in. Doors rot. Walls lean until they collapse entirely. You've patched your hut so many times, it looks like a basket made of sticks, bark and broken pottery. You've forgotten what it's like to sit inside something and not feel the wind creeping through the gaps. The idea that people once built palaces out of stone, symmetrical, beautiful, waterproof, feels like a cruel joke. You tried to fix a plough once, just a simple tool, nothing fancy. You tied a stone blade to a stick with leather cords and dragged it behind your last goat. It broke in 20 minutes. The goat cried. You almost cried with it. Then you went back to digging holes with your hands. Sometimes you dream of shovels, not the crude flat stones you use now, but real ones, metal, smooth, heavy. In those dreams, you dig forever, and the dirt smells like bread. No one writes anymore. Not in your village anyway. The last person who could even scratch letters into wet clay died of fever 3 winters ago. He tried to teach a few people, but they were too busy trying to not starve. Now if someone finds a tablet or an inscription, they carry it like a sacred object, hoping someone somewhere might still understand it. But most people use the clay for bricks. The gods can keep their messages. Your roof needs patching. You've heard that once there were people whose only job was remembering. Scribes, accountants, scholars, people who kept track of debts, grain stores, birth records, treaties, rainfall. You've also heard those people were the first to die. No one needs math when they're being chased by raiders. No one wants a historian when they're bartering for mouldy onions. You suspect a lot of knowledge died with them. Recipes, medicines, building plans, instructions for how to boil certain roots without dying. You suspect a lot more will die with you. Even your tools don't behave anymore. You use what you can find. A chipped blade here, a cracked hammerhead there. You've learned to tie things together with strips of bark, animal sinew, old belts. Nothing lasts. You sharpen your knife with a rock until it snaps. You try to melt old bronze into something new, and end up with useless slag. You once tried to make a fishing net from your own hair. It didn't work, but it kept your hands busy for 2 days. It's not that you're lazy. You work harder now than anyone did in the so-called golden age. You rise before the sun, dig, haul, lift, cook, sew, and patch until your body threatens to give out. But work isn't the same thing as progress. You're busy surviving, not building. And no one remembers how to build anymore. The knowledge is gone, and the bones of the world are splintering beneath you. You sometimes find old things buried in the ground. A piece of shaped metal, a bit of carved ivory, a cup with a painted rim. You stare at it for a long time, trying to imagine the hands that made it, the tools they had, the skill they must have wielded. You feel envy, then you feel rage, then you bury it again. It's not for you. It belongs to a world that functioned, and you are not part of that world. This isn't just a collapse, it's forgetting in slow motion. It's watching everything unravel, and realizing you've been handed only the frayed ends. You don't rebuild, you repurpose. You don't repair, you make do. The world was built by people smarter, safer, and far more organized than you. You live in their wreckage, trying to remember how anything ever worked at all. You've always known the water wasn't safe. You just hoped you were lucky enough to survive it. Most days, your choices are drink from the ditch behind your hut, Try to boil something from the stream that smells like rot and dead fish, or chew wet grass until your jaw aches and your stomach revolts. None of it works. The water stays filthy. You drink anyway, because thirst kills faster than disease, though not by much. At first the signs are subtle, a bit of stomach pain, some cramps. Then the real fun begins. Your gut turns against you. You sweat through your clothes. Your bowels liquefy. You try to stay near the edge of the village because walking back and forth to the bushes becomes a gamble you keep losing. Every step is a betrayal. Every gurgle a warning. You try fasting, herbs, prayers, pacing. None of it helps. You start to envy the goats. They die cleaner. People call it many things. The looseness, the blood plague, the river's curse. No one knows what it is, but everyone has had it. You've buried children from it. Old men have died clutching their stomachs. Entire families have vanished in less than a week, leaving behind nothing but the smell. There are no doctors. Not anymore. The last one you met tried to treat a fever with burnt onions and singing. He died shaking in a cart full of soiled blankets. Infections follow you like a shadow. You scratch a mosquito bite, and a few days later, your arm is twice its size, hot to the touch, and leaking something yellow. You burn the wound. It helps until it doesn't. You cover it in honey and mud. You whisper curses over it. You ask your neighbour to suck out the poison. He tries. He dies. Your arm stays swollen. You survive, barely, and consider that a miracle. Your gums start to bleed around the same time your teeth loosen. At first, you think it's just from chewing too much bark. Then you taste iron in your mouth, even when you haven't eaten in days. Your breath smells like death. You try to rinse with salt water, but all you get is pain. Someone says it's scurvy. Someone else says it's demons. You nod, because it doesn't matter either way. You're not going to the afterlife with a full set of teeth. Fever becomes background noise. It comes and goes like weather. You wake up soaked in sweat, your bones rattling like sticks. You pile on furs, then throw them off 5 minutes later. You hallucinate a talking dog. You confess your sins to a wall. Then it passes, or it doesn't. You've stopped counting days. Time bends when your stomach is empty and your bowels are full. You try not to think about meat. The last time you ate it, it was from something found already dead. You cooked it as long as you could. It still made you sick. The vomiting didn't stop for 2 days. You couldn't stand without blacking out. You promised yourself you'd never eat meat again. 3 days later, you did. Because hunger doesn't care what you promised. There's something especially cruel about how fast illness spreads. Someone coughs at dawn, and by nightfall 4 people are burning with fever. A scratch becomes an abscess. A sneeze becomes a grave. You know it happens through water or touch or breath, but knowing doesn't help. You don't have clean water. You can't avoid touching people. And holding your breath hasn't worked out very well so far. You once tried to dig a latrine, a proper one, deep and away from the sleeping huts. It took you a day and a half. You collapsed twice from the smell. You lined it with stones, like you'd seen in one of those stories the elders told. No one used it. It was too far. People kept squatting near the fire pit instead. You gave up. Now you just walk to the same patch of trees and hope you're the only one there. The flies are constant, clouds of them, buzzing, biting, crawling into your eyes and ears. You can't keep them off the food. You can't keep them off the sick. You swatted one once and it left a smear of someone else's blood on your arm. You washed it off with ditch water. That might have been the start of your last fever. Or maybe it was the salted fish you stole from the dying man under the bridge. You don't know what health feels like anymore. On your best days, you're upright, not leaking, and your head doesn't spin when you stand. That's your standard. If your stool isn't red or black, you call it a victory. You look at your fingers and count how many nails you've lost to infection this year. You try not to remember how many you had at the start. People die fast now. They fall over in the field, in their sleep, while trying to stand. You've stopped asking what killed them. The answer is always the same. Everything. No one dies of one thing anymore. They die of the combination of filth, hunger, despair, and time. You don't bother with causes. You just find the body, dig the hole, and try to keep the flies off the next meal. There are no cures, there are no miracles. You are rotting from the inside out. And still, somehow, you wake up every morning. Still alive, still thirsty. Congratulations! You have dysentery. Again. You didn't want to leave. No one does, not at first. You held on longer than most, patching the roof with reeds, scooping water from a muddy hole, telling yourself that things would get better. They didn't. They got worse. The raids became more frequent. The sickness spread faster. One night the wind shifted, and the glow on the horizon was close enough to smell. Burned grain, burned wood, burned people. That was when you ran. You packed what little you had left into a cloth sack, a dull blade, a cracked bowl, half a loaf of bread that tasted like mildew. You didn't even say goodbye. There was no one left to say it to. The old man next door had stopped breathing days ago. The neighbour's hut was already caved in. You didn't wait for anyone else to decide. You walked, or rather, you limped. Everyone limps now. The first town you came to had already seen its share of refugees. You could tell by the way they looked at you. Tired, angry, afraid. They had nothing to give, and even if they did, they weren't going to give it to you. You asked for water. They pointed to a puddle near the latrines. You asked for food. They pointed to the woods and laughed. You stayed one night, curled up outside a half-broken wall, and left before they decided you were worth robbing or worse. You learned quickly that no one is coming to help you. There are no relief caravans, no guards, no priests with healing chants and miracle poultices. You're not a victim of bad luck. You're just another mouth no one wants to feed. When you arrive in a new place, you keep your head down. You trade what little you have, a knife for a crust of bread, a pair of sandals for a corner of a floor. Sometimes you barter labour. Sometimes you offer silence. Sometimes you lie and say you're only passing through. You sleep wherever you can. Ditches, collapsed huts, animal pens. You've slept under trees and inside dry wells. You've slept in ash and in filth and in the rain, soaked through and shivering. You've used your own arm as a pillow and your own knees as a blanket. Some nights you sleep sitting up, afraid that if you lie down, you won't get back up. Hunger follows you like a loyal pet. So does sickness. You eat things you never would have touched before. Bugs, weeds, bark, rotten fruit. You chew slowly, pretending it's something else. A man once offered you a chunk of meat. You didn't ask what it was. You just ate it and tried not to remember the smell. You vomited anyway, but not until later. That still counts as a good day. You meet other refugees along the way, some travel in groups, huddled together like wounded animals. Others walk alone, eyes empty, feet bleeding. You nod at each other but don't speak much. Words feel dangerous. Every conversation becomes a calculation. Will this person share, steal, or stab? You trust no one. You help no one unless there's something in it for you. That's not cruelty. That's survival. You lose people. Everyone does. Some wander off in the night. Some get sick and slow the group down. Some simply don't wake up. You've buried siblings, cousins, friends. You've left others unburied because the ground was too hard and the flies were too fast. You stopped saying their names after the third one. You stopped remembering their faces after the fifth. There's no destination. You're not going anywhere in particular. You're just trying to stay ahead of the next fire, the next raid, the next outbreak. Sometimes you hear rumours of a safe place across the mountains or a fertile valley untouched by war. You chase those stories until they fall apart in your hands like dry leaves. The valley is flooded. The safe place is gone. The mountain pass is full of corpses and bones picked clean. You start to measure time in footsteps and empty stomachs. You count the days by how many times you've bled. You stop thinking in seasons It's always hunger season. It's always fear season. The only calendar you know is your own worsening condition and the number of people still walking beside you. Fewer every week. You keep moving because stopping is worse. Stopping means someone finds you. Stopping means you start thinking about everything you've lost, about how this isn't a journey, or an exile, or even a disaster. It's a long, grinding erasure. You're not fleeing toward anything. You're just being slowly pushed out of the world, one step at a time. Sometimes you think about returning. To what, though? The burnt shell of your village? The bones of your family? The memory of a home that was never really safe to begin with? You laugh at yourself for even imagining it. Return is for stories. Return is for people with something left. You're not going back. You're not going forward. You're just still here. Somehow. You're not a pilgrim. You're not a pioneer. You're not building a new life. You're a refugee. And that's not a title. It's a sentence. You used to think the sky was neutral. Not friendly, not hostile. Just there. Something distant and indifferent that gave you sun, stars, clouds, and the occasional helpful breeze. You were wrong. The sky has opinions now, and none of them are good. It punishes you with heat, then with cold, then with things that shouldn't fall from the air. And worst of all, it doesn't follow any rules. It's not a cycle. It's not a pattern. It's spite disguised as weather. The sun stays longer than it should, burning through your skin, cracking your lips, boiling the ground until the dirt curls like bark. You cover your head, but the heat sinks through your bones. It kills the crops before they sprout, then kills the insects that might have pollinated them. The river you relied on becomes a trickle of sour slime, and the fish vanish, if they were ever real in the first place. You start waking up covered in your own sweat, dizzy before you've even stood, and too tired to cry about it. Then just when you think the sun has claimed the earth for good, it stops. The temperature drops overnight. Not gradually, not seasonally, just gone. One evening you're sweating through your rags, and the next morning you wake up shivering, your breath fogging in front of your face, your fingers stiff and purple. A freak frost rolls in like a curse. It kills everything, the heat didn't. Whatever brave little green shoots managed to survive are now wilted, blackened, and brittle. You watch the frost creep over your last gourd vine, like it's strangling it on purpose. You've tried to explain it. Everyone has. Some blame the gods. Some say the world is ending. One old man insists it's all because a volcano erupted far to the west, blanketing the skies with ash. You don't know what a volcano is, you assume it's a monster. Either way, it doesn't matter. You can't eat ash, you can't fight clouds. All you know is that the sky hates you, and it's not subtle about it. Rain used to be a gift, now it's a threat. It comes too hard or not at all. Sometimes it skips your village for weeks, then returns in a single violent burst that washes away your fields, your huts, and whatever scraps you were drying for winter. You've seen it rain mud. Not dirt and water, actual mud. Thick enough to choke chickens and ruin clay jars. You've seen it rain frogs once, or something like frogs. Whatever they were, they died on impact. The gods remain silent about that. When it doesn't rain, the dust takes over. It gets into your eyes, your throat, your lungs. You wake up coughing and go to sleep wheezing. It coats your food, your water, your skin. You start to believe it's permanent, that you'll be buried in it before you die, and that the act of breathing is just another form of slow suffocation. You wrap cloth over your mouth and pretend it helps. It doesn't. You still taste sand when you chew. There's no such thing as a growing season anymore. You plant because you have to, not because you think anything will come of it. You stick seeds in the earth, say a few words to a sky that hasn't blinked in months, and wait for the inevitable disappointment. If something does grow, it's stunted, bitter, and usually devoured by insects or birds before you get to it. You've tried scarecrows, fences, even traps. You ended up eating the scarecrow's stuffing and using the trap to catch a neighbour's chicken. The sky looked on with its usual indifference. Some people insist it's your fault, that you didn't pray hard enough, that you angered some unseen force, that you've been cursed. You start to believe them after a while. It's easier than accepting that there's no reason at all, that the world just stopped cooperating. So you blame yourself. You dig trenches, sing songs, offer blood, burn herbs, and beg forgiveness. None of it works. The frost still comes. The drought still returns. The wind still howls like a wounded animal with no master. Animals die fast. First the small ones, then the weak, then the ones you were saving for milk or breeding. You try to keep them shaded, watered, fed. It's not enough. One day, you find your last goat lying in the dirt, legs stiff, tongue black. You butcher it, cry a little, and eat what you can. The rest goes bad faster than usual. The air is too hot for preservation, too wet for storing, too unpredictable for planning. You bury what you can't eat and hope the next storm doesn't unearth it. You look at the sky differently now. You used to search it for omens, for signs of change. Now you stare at it like you're staring down an enemy who already won. It doesn't argue, it doesn't react, it just hovers above you, massive and blank, like the lid of a pot you're slowly boiling in. You stop praying, not out of rebellion, but exhaustion. The sky doesn't answer prayers. It doesn't answer anything. It just waits. Eventually, you stop asking why and start asking how long. How long until the next storm? How long until the next drought? How long until your bones stop aching and your mouth stops cracking and your crops stop pretending they're going to make it this time? The answers never come. You check the horizon every morning like a gambler waiting for bad news. And every time, the sky greets you the same way, with silence, with cruelty, and with just enough false hope to keep you trying. There was a time when kings sat on high walls and ate soft bread while the rest of the world bled quietly into the soil. Their words were law, their meals imported, their robes so clean they looked offensive. Their palaces were filled with scribes, dancers, golden cups, and the sound of things working, grain arriving, taxes paid, foreign dignitaries bowing low. Those days are over. Now their cities are broken shells, their thrones looted, and their heads roll just as easily as yours. No one writes their names in clay anymore. No one carves their victories on temple walls. What's left of them is scattered across burned courtyards and blackened banquet halls. Hattusa, the great Hittite stronghold, gone. A city once wrapped in stone walls, thick enough to survive a siege for years. Now a smouldering carcass of broken statues and overturned altars. The king's bones might still be there, buried beneath the ash with his guards and his storehouses of barley. Further west, Mycenae stands silent. The lions still guard the gate, mouths frozen mid-roar, but the people are gone. No war chariots thunder past, no servants sweep the halls. The Megaron is empty, and the treasure rooms were looted long ago. Some by outsiders, some by desperate insiders, with nothing left to believe in. The line of kings who once claimed descent from demigods now end with a question mark and a trail of dried blood on the stone. Ugarit tried to send help requests, letters baked into clay, stamped with royal seals, pleading for reinforcements, for ships, for aid. The messages were found centuries too late, buried in a collapsed archive, still legible, still screaming into a void that never answered. The enemy is at the gates, one letter says. You can imagine the king who dictated it, robes askew, hands shaking, surrounded by men who no longer believed in him. You know how that story ends. You've seen the ending enough times. Closer to home, your own little ruler didn't fare much better. He called himself Warden of the Valley, or something equally self-important. Had a crown made of tin and bronze and a chariot with wheels that looked imported, until one cracked and collapsed beneath him, in full view of the village. He sobbed right there in the dust, tugging at the reins while his guards stood motionless, and everyone else pretended not to notice. He lasted another week maybe. The last time you saw him, he was gnawing on dried peas and staring into nothing. When he stopped moving, no one said anything. You helped dig the hole. Titles don't matter now. Neither do seals, robes, palaces, or divine right. The economy is teeth and fists, and royalty doesn't get a discount. You've seen nobles try to barter signet rings for mouldy dates. You've watched high priests offer ceremonial blades in exchange for a single jar of clean water. One woman, once married to a governor, tried to claim shelter in the name of her husband's office. The villagers laughed her out of town. She didn't make it to the next one. Some kings fled. Not all of them died in their halls. A few ran, took their families, their guards, whatever treasure they could carry, and vanished into the wilderness. You've heard rumours about where they went, to mountain strongholds, to island hideouts, to forgotten temples in the east. But none of them returned. None sent help. None rebuilt. Power doesn't travel well, especially when it's been reduced to a handful of men hoarding gold and hoping no one finds them. The divine order collapsed with them. The priests who once claimed kings were chosen by the gods. Now lie face down in the dust, their scrolls rotting beside them. The rituals have stopped. The temples are empty. And the last time someone tried to declare themselves ruler of your village, they were stabbed with a pitchfork before they could finish the sentence. People don't want leaders now. They want food, or at least they want everyone else to suffer just as much. You've seen a child wearing a crown, real bronze too big for his head, looted from a corpse and worn like a joke. He walked around demanding tribute until someone pushed him into a ditch. No one helped him out. No one said a word. That's what kingship is now. A costume, a relic, something to mock or melt down. The age of orders and oaths is over. No one rules, not in any way that matters. There might be one or two still clinging to power somewhere, sitting in half-burned rooms, surrounded by guards who remember protocol, but not purpose. Maybe they still have enough grain to hold out another season. Maybe they still light incense and mutter prayers before meals. But they're not kings anymore. They're just better-fed victims waiting their turn. This is the age of collapse. The world isn't interested in crowns. It eats the mighty and the meek in equal measure. Once history belonged to kings. Now it belongs to whoever manages not to die before morning. No one talks about prices anymore. Not because things are cheap, but because the concept stopped making sense. What is a bowl of barley worth when you haven't seen barley in 3 months? What's the value of silver when there's no one left to mint coins or weigh them or trust they aren't just painted rocks? Markets still exist, sort of, but they look more like gambling dens than trading posts. There are no ledgers. There are no scribes. There are only desperate people clutching whatever scraps they didn't eat last week, hoping to exchange them for something slightly less poisonous. Trade used to be the lifeblood of civilization. Ships brought copper, caravans brought grain, and scribes tracked every last jar and measure in neat little lines of cuneiform. Now there's no one left to write anything down, and even if there were, no one can agree on what anything's worth. You once saw a man trade a goat for a half-empty jar of spoiled lentils. 2 days later, he was dead from food poisoning. The man who sold him the jar used the goat to buy a rusted spear. That spear broke on the first use. No one won. Barter is all that remains, and even that's become dangerous. It's not about what you need anymore. It's about what you can convince someone to part with without getting stabbed. You've seen people fight over a cracked bowl, a single onion, a strip of cloth that could maybe serve as a bandage or a sling or a burial wrap, depending on how the day goes. You've tried trading things you thought were valuable. A bronze hairpin, a carved comb, a copper buckle. No one cared, not unless they could melt it or burn it. Currency doesn't exist anymore. It died with the palace scribes and the traders who used to carry it. There's no exchange rate for survival. You can't eat coins, and you can't defend your family with a stamped seal. One woman tried using a gold necklace to buy a loaf of bread." The baker laughed, then took the necklace and gave her the crust anyway. She was too hungry to protest. A week later, he used the necklace to bribe a group of raiders into sparing his youngest son. They took the necklace, then the son, then the bread. Inflation doesn't describe what's happening. It suggests there's still a system, still someone keeping track, adjusting numbers, pretending control. But there's no control, just the rising cost of staying alive, measured not in coin, but in teeth, blood, and risk. Yesterday, you traded a pair of sandals for a half-burned fish. Today, the same fish costs a knife. Tomorrow, it might cost a finger. There's no consistency, no fairness, and certainly no refunds. Work doesn't guarantee compensation. You can carry water, mend clothes, patch roofs, dig graves, but people only pay if they're not as hungry as you. You spent a day hauling stones for a man who promised payment in eggs. At the end, he gave you one egg and a smile. The egg was cracked. You boiled it anyway. The yolk was green. You ate it. What else were you going to do? Even theft has become complicated. Everyone guards their things like wounded animals. You steal a loaf, and someone tracks you down with a blade and a grudge. You steal too well, and you make yourself a target. Word spreads that you have food, and suddenly everyone wants to be your friend, until you won't share. Then they want to be your undertaker. You've learned to look poor, even when you're briefly not. You hide what little you have under dirt, under rocks, under your body while you sleep. Some people have tried to bring order back, scribbled IOUs, carved tokens, even attempts at local currencies. None of it works. Trust is extinct. No one believes a promise that isn't backed by a blade. You once saw a group of elders try to re-establish weights and measures using old bronze rods. Their meeting ended with a fistfight over whether the rods were even real bronze. One of them had his jaw broken with the official unit of length. There are still places that call themselves markets. You've passed through them. Rows of half-empty stalls, guarded by men who watch you like wolves watch sheep. They don't shout prices. They don't offer samples. They just stand there, arms crossed, daring you to reach for anything without speaking first. You tried to trade a carved amulet once. The merchant squinted at it, sniffed it, then tossed it back and offered you a cracked bowl of sour milk in return. You said no. He followed you for 3 streets. Barter is just negotiation, with fewer words and more weapons. You once traded a blanket for a handful of dried figs. Later that night, someone came to your door with a club, asking if you were the one who stole their blanket. You said no. They hit you anyway. The figs weren't even good. In the end, you trade what people want in the moment. Food, tools, shelter, warmth, silence. You've offered your labour, your clothes, your memories, your dignity. Once, in a particularly grim exchange, you bartered a lice-ridden blanket for 2 hours of sleep inside someone's half-standing storage shed. You woke up cold, bitten, and alone. They had taken your shoes while you slept. That was the most valuable part of the trade. There is no economy here, just needs, fear, and the constant shuffle of desperation. No one is rich, no one is secure, and everyone, no matter what they once had, is one bad bargain away from starving in a ditch. You try to build a future. It's the one lie you tell yourself more often than any other. That all of this, the hunger, the filth, the wandering, the loss, might somehow amount to something if you can just get your children through it. If they live, maybe it meant something. Maybe the gods weren't completely absent. Maybe the world has another chapter to write. That belief gets you out of bed some mornings. Most days, it just hurts. You do your best. You teach them how to find clean water, how to avoid mouldy grain, how to listen for the sound of footsteps that mean danger instead of safety. You teach them which herbs numb the pain and which ones make it worse. You teach them how to hide, not how to read or how to dream or how to imagine anything better, just how to stay alive in a world that spits them out like bad meat. They try to be children. They still play for a while. You watch them laugh at shadows, chase frogs with sticks, invent songs about things they've never actually seen. Castles, lions, stars that don't flicker. For a moment, you believe they might be stronger than you were. Then the cough starts, then the fever, then they stop eating, or their belly swells, despite the bones showing through their ribs. You know the signs before anyone else. You've buried too many not to recognize them. Sometimes it's illness. A simple cold becomes a death sentence. A scratch from a dirty stick turns black and spreads up the arm. You try to boil water. You try to keep them warm. You pray. You offer food you needed for yourself. Nothing works. You hold them while their breath grows shallow, while their eyes glaze, while their fingers curl like dry leaves. You sing to them even when your throat is raw. You lie to them about what comes next. Sometimes it's violence. Raiders don't care how old they are. Disease doesn't pause for small lungs. A stampede, a fire, a sword meant for someone else. Death is uncreative, but it never lacks opportunity. You've seen a child die from falling debris during a storm, crushed under a roof beam, too rotten to hold. You've seen another freeze to death, 2 feet from a fire, because there wasn't enough fuel to keep it going. You still carry that guilt like a second skin. You once carried your son 5 miles to find a priest. He was feverish, barely conscious, his skin too hot to touch. You wrapped him in your own cloak, whispering promises you knew you couldn't keep. The priest didn't answer the door. His shrine had collapsed days earlier, and he was buried under the rubble. You sat outside and prayed anyway. By the time you finished, your son was gone. You kept praying afterward, but not for anything, just because it felt wrong to stop. They don't make it to adulthood. You know that. You still try. You save the best food for them. You walk slower so they can keep up. You sleep in front of the door so nothing gets in before it goes through you first. You trade everything you owned for a blanket to keep them warm through one more night. It buys you time, not much, just enough to get used to the idea of losing them. And when they die, you bury them. You try to find soft ground, but there's rarely time or tools. Sometimes you wrap them in cloth, sometimes you don't. You mark the spot with a stone if you can. You remember it for a while. Eventually, the world makes you forget. There are too many graves and not enough space between them. Some try again, have more children, replace what's been lost, like it's a numbers game. You understand why, but it doesn't get easier. The fear sets in earlier. You watch every sniffle like it's an omen. You pack and unpack burial wrappings before they can even walk. You learn not to name them until they've survived at least one winter. It's still not enough. Your own body starts to resist the idea. The food isn't enough. The water is poison. The air stinks of ash and rot. You carry the child anyway, through frost, through famine, through fear. You hope, absurdly, that maybe this one will survive, that maybe the world will shift back toward life instead of death. You try not to imagine them grown, but sometimes you do. You picture them taller than you, with strong arms, steady hands, eyes that still believe in something. It makes it worse when they don't make it past 6. There will be no grandchildren. You don't say it out loud, but you know it. The line ends here. It's not dramatic. It's not noble. It's just slow and grey and full of the kind of sorrow that never even bothers to scream. You are not raising children. You are carrying memory that won't last, and the world is already forgetting them. In the end, all you can do is keep walking. Carry the ones who can't. Bury the ones who fall. Lie to the ones who are left. Tell them there's something waiting ahead. A better place. A better season. A better God. Anything to make the next step feel worth taking. You don't believe it, but you say it anyway. You keep moving. Not because you believe there's something better out there, but because staying still is worse. Staying means waiting for the next disaster to find you. It means watching the same sky, listening to the same coughs, counting down the same days until someone else dies. So you leave. Again. You pack your scraps, tighten the rags on your feet, and set off toward wherever people say hope might still exist. You don't believe them, but you walk anyway. Mountains don't offer safety. They offer cold. Your hands crack open from the wind. Your knees buckle on steep paths and your breath becomes a cloud that hides your own face from you. The snow, when it comes, is indifferent. You find the frozen corpse of a man in royal armour near a trail marker, half covered in drift. You strip his cloak and keep moving. His sword was already gone. Someone else came first. The only signs of life are the ravens, and they're not there for conversation. The desert isn't better. It stretches for days in every direction, flat and hot and dead. You ration your water like it might hear you begging. You pray for clouds, and when they come, they bring sand instead of rain. You pass old camps where fires were once lit, now just black scars and sun-bleached bones. At night, the cold makes your joints feel like rusted hinges. You keep walking because turning back would mean retracing your own failure, and you don't have the strength for that. Someone tells you about boats, about islands that haven't burned yet, so you follow the shoreline until you find what used to be a fishing village. The boats are either smashed, stolen, or floating offshore, with no oars and no guarantees. You try to build a raft. It sinks before you finish tying it together. The sea doesn't want you. Or maybe it does, but not as a passenger. You stand on the beach and consider walking straight in. You don't, but you think about it longer than you should. Along the way, you find others like you. Stragglers, whole families dragging wagons of scraps, mothers with children tied to their backs, old men who haven't spoken in days. Some are headed east, some west. None of them know why. You nod at them, share what you can, and keep moving. Occasionally you join a group for a while. They slow you down. Then again, they make it easier to sleep without one eye open. At least until someone disappears with your last knife. Everywhere you go, you find someone else already fleeing. You're part of something larger now, a tide of collapse, rolling endlessly across a continent. You hear stories of cities overwhelmed by refugees, of rulers sealing their gates and burning bridges behind them. You pass through towns where no one will speak to you. You pass others where they pretend not to see you at all. In one place, a stranger offers you food, then steals your shoes in the night. You limp for 3 days until you find a dead man your size. His boots are stiff with dried blood, but they fit. You lose track of the borders. Kingdoms are melting into one another, collapsing like rotten beams. You step into one region still ruled by a warlord who thinks he's a king. He demands tribute. You offer silence. His guards take your cloak and let you go. In the next valley, a local clan tells you to leave before sunset. You sleep in a tree and wake up covered in insect bites and regret. There's nowhere that welcomes strangers anymore. Strangers are problems. Strangers are mouths. Eventually, you stop asking where you're going. You stop listening to rumours. Every safe place you reach is already crumbling. Every new beginning is a different kind of ending. The world is shrinking, even as you keep walking. There are fewer places that haven't burned, fewer names worth remembering. You see more ruins than homes. You smell more corpses than bread. You start recognising the same kinds of emptiness, repeating like bad dreams in different landscapes. You don't call yourself a refugee anymore. You don't call yourself anything. Titles imply purpose. You are just a shape in motion, pulled forward by habit or hunger or inertia. You walk because you've walked for so long that stopping feels unnatural. You don't talk about going back. There's nothing left behind you. You don't talk about settling down. You know better than to hope. Some days you walk past people who've already stopped, curled in doorways, slumped beside streams, lying beneath trees with their eyes open and their chests still. You don't check if they're dead. You just keep moving. On rare days you find a place that feels still, a ruined house with 3 walls and a patch of shade. You sit, you rest. You think maybe this is where you'll stay. By morning, you're gone again. There is no destination. There is no final stop. You don't flee anymore. You drift, one foot in front of the other, until it doesn't matter where you are, until the difference between going and staying disappears, until the world forgets you are moving at all. The end doesn't arrive with fire or screams or divine thunder. It arrives quietly, like rot in wood, like a cough that never goes away. Not with a final blow, but with the last flicker of something already hollowed out. Eventually, the collapse slows, not because anything got better, but because there's nothing left to collapse. The cities are ash heaps, the roads are bone trails, and the people who once named things are silent now. What remains isn't civilization, it's residue. The great cities are spoken of only as stories now, if they're spoken of at all. Their names are half-remembered syllables in broken dialects. Their temples are heaps of fallen stone, overgrown and sun-bleached. Their archives, if any are left, sit unread, unreadable, or pulverized into dust by feet that didn't care what secrets the clay held. No one writes anymore. No one builds. No one asks questions about what came before. The questions don't feed you, and the answers never mattered. Memory fades in chunks. First the kings, then the dates, then the names of rivers and gods and grandparents. Songs lose verses. Myths lose meaning. You forget the name of the last person you buried, then the name of the last person you loved. The language shifts under your tongue. What used to be a hymn becomes a riddle, then a joke, then a grunt. What was once history becomes folklore, and then that too slips away. The world shrinks, the borders vanish, the wide web of trade, tribute, war and diplomacy that once spanned continents now fits inside a single valley. Maybe a village, maybe a family. You don't go further than the nearest field. You don't talk about the sea. You don't know who lives beyond the ridge, and you don't care to ask, and the outside world has stopped being real. Everything beyond the next meal is myth. You become a scavenger of echoes. You live among the bones of an age you never understood. The bowl you eat from was made by someone who could read. The spear you carry was forged by someone who knew how fire works. The stone you sleep beside once held a law, a hymn, an inventory of grain. You don't know. You don't ask. It's smooth now, and it keeps the wind off your face. That's enough. There are still children somehow. They grow up knowing only what can be carried. They hear stories about cities where the walls touch the clouds and gods walked among men. They don't believe them. You don't blame them. All they know is what's left. Broken tools, broken paths, broken people. You try to teach them what little you remember, but the words come out cracked. You're not passing on knowledge. You're passing on noise. There's no one left to keep time. Calendars stopped when the scribes did. The stars are still there, but no one tracks their movements. You might be living in the same year as someone across the sea, or 100 years apart. You wouldn't know, you wouldn't meet, if they're even still alive. Time has become personal, small, irrelevant. You wake, you eat, you ache, you sleep. Repeat. You hear less now. No sermons, no shouting merchants, no chants echoing from temples. Just the wind, the creak of wood, the crunch of dry soil underfoot. Even the birds seem quieter. The silence is different from the early days of collapse. Then it was tense, waiting for the next raid, the next scream, the next fire. Now it's settled, bored, absolute, like the world is holding its breath not out of fear, but because it's forgotten how to exhale. You don't think of yourself as part of history. You don't think about history at all. That's someone else's word, someone else's job. You don't know that centuries from now, people will dig through your ashes and give you a name you never used. They'll call it a transition period, a dark age, a collapse. They'll argue about which part of you meant the most. They'll find your tools and marvel at how crude they became. They'll find your bones and label them with numbers. And in the ground beneath their feet, they'll find a layer of ash, soot and rubble. A line of destruction so thick and sudden, it slices through time like a wound. They'll call it the horizon, the point where everything old stopped and everything uncertain began. You're part of that line now. Not a hero, not a villain, just a smudge in the sediment. A warning maybe, or a footnote. Congratulations, you made history by ending it. That brings us to the end of tonight's story. Not of a fall, but of a slow, grinding disappearance. If you're still awake, thank you for drifting through the dust with me, and for remembering that most of history isn't written in victories or monuments, but in silence, starvation, and lives too ordinary to be saved. If you'd like early access to future collapses, ad-free audio of these episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a Patreon link in the description. You can also like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten unravelling you'd like unearthed. And if you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more wandering souls find their way here. Sleep well.